Craig, Rockwell Automation is known for their innovation decades in the industrial world.
Absolutely.
A lot of their clients probably have a lot of concern about moving to the cloud.
Yep.
What would you say to them about, that choice about staying on-prem and moving to the cloud?
Well, ultimately, we do envision that the majority of their customers and the majority of applications will begin to all be cloud-based. But, in manufacturing, there tends to be more of an evolution rather than revolution. It's so critical that processes, you do not want to cause a disruption to a process that can cause, for example, unscheduled downtime or loss of production. So people like to be able to evolve at the pace that they're ready. So the perfect solution is that to allow the customers to move and evolve at the pace that fits their own needs. There's no magic formula. It's really on a case-by-case basis. One of the things that Rockwell Automation has done is, even though they've certainly have a number of on-premise solutions, especially for applications like MES, for example, they went out and purchased a very strong, MES cloud provider, a company called Plex. So what this does is this enables a Rockwell customer to really decide when they are ready to move, for example, their MES applications from on-prem into the cloud. Some will be comfortable right now maintaining on-prem. Some will want to begin a migration now and move to a Plex solution. Some may actually even end up in a hybrid situation of having both. But the idea is to let the customer determine when is it right for them. So I think that's why it's critical to be able to truly, when a customer says, is it cloud or on-prem, the answer is yes. But it's not yes to one, it's really yes to both. And I think that's probably one of the things that drove a company like Rockwell Automation, to purchase Plex, and why I think it was certainly a very great strategic acquisition for them.
Okay, and just a follow-up to that. So sounds like Plex at one time was an alliance partner, became a company that Rockwell acquired. When it comes time for a company to decide whether they're going to stay on-prem or move to the cloud, is this something where most clients will work with Rockwell or their Plex group directly, or does Rockwell have an ecosystem of channel partners and systems integrators that can help them with that decision?
Exactly. Rockwell does have a very, very strong group of Encompass partners, solution providers, which are companies that have a very strong level of partnership with Rockwell itself. Most companies that Rockwell many times that either acquires or forms very, very high levels of partnership come in through that Encompass partner or solution provider channel. They certainly have a very close relationship with all the systems integrators just because of the number of projects that Rockwell does need to implement. So we're working with organizations like CSIA, the Control Systems Integrators Association. They have a very, very strong relationship with the great majority of those members, because this is really the channel that really is going to help these customers make the transition. To give you an example, sometimes what we find is that customers when they have to decide cloud versus on-prem, sometimes they look at the situation of real time. For example, maybe for a human machine interface software application, they may want to keep that on-prem because they may have a worry about latency, that if it's up in the cloud, that maybe they're not getting quite the same real-time abilities to monitor and control. When applications like historians, MES certainly would be a case, quality, production management, a lot of these applications really, lend themselves very well to the cloud, because obviously that they're, the storage aspect, certainly be able to store the terabytes and terabytes of data that's required, the ability to have the necessary analytics to interpret that data and converting it into meaningful information is critical. So this is an area where that's very strong. And the fact is that because in many cases the cloud providers, whether it be Microsoft Azure or Amazon AWS, they have very, very high levels of cybersecurity technology that are built in. And certainly in this era, cybersecurity is completely paramount. So the cloud brings a tremendous amount of security with it. So sometimes what we find is people tend to think of the control applications, keeping that on-prem and beginning to migrate everything else to the cloud. There will be a day, certainly, though I do think that it may all be in the cloud and maybe very little will be on-prem. But I would say for today, in today's era, right now, that seems to be about the borderline that most customers are thinking right now.
So Craig, what if I am a industrial end user? I already have relationships with hyperscalers. Would the Rockwell solution enable me to deploy a multi-cloud solution and actually even to take a step back? What about hybrid cloud? What if I want to maintain some of my infrastructure on-prem as well as in the cloud?
Well, what Rockwell does very well is they're able for their hybrid applications. They tend to use, for example, various edge devices that are located in the plant. These are physical devices that are close to the factory floor. Sometimes they may be something that may work, let's say, as part of their PLCs and packs. Very close to where the product is being manufactured and processed. That way, the information is gathered, certainly again in real time. The predictive and prescriptive analytics, for example, can be run right at that point, and now that data can be converted into meaningful information that can either be fed back into the process itself to be able to make control decisions, or that information could be sent up to the cloud, to be stored and used for other business-related applications. So Rockwell does have today, they're producing many solutions that have the combination of edge devices as well as working with the hyperscalers in the cloud. For example, they have a collaboration with a company called Stratus Technologies, and they maybe do a lot of the edge devices working with Stratus. And then, for example, going to the cloud, whether it be, Microsoft Azure, whether it be Amazon AWS. So they're working closely with the hyperscalers. So that way they're truly delivering on a hybrid solution. And to be honest, based on ARC research, that's what we see coming in, probably over the next, 3 to 5 years. Is we see edge remaining very, very strong. We see certainly continued growth in the cloud, and we see that these hybrid applications are what really are going to be very, very dominant. And then again, the separation being real time in the edge, and maybe things that are more for a business, that are leveraging more for production management, business, quality, historian. Those would be the information that would most likely be shared in the cloud. So thinking in terms of these hybrid solutions would be the best way to go.
So I was thinking about something that might feed into this. So obviously Rockwell has deployed their solutions in, I would say, super intense, continuous, mission critical applications. But what does that say for other companies that might not be an oil facility or a power transmission distribution plant? So I might run a batch process that might not be as mission critical to me, but what does it say about Rockwell's experience in these super critical industries and how that could positively affect my business?
Well, I think the thing that Rockwell has going for it is they're used to being in applications where downtime and failure are not an option. I mean, many times when we're walking through some of our clients' factories and we're looking at some Rockwell legacy PLCs, for example, that go back to the 1980s, sometimes even the 1970s. These products have never failed and never let anyone down. And as a matter of fact, one of the barriers sometimes to migration from, let's say, some of the older units has always been the fact that, well, why do we want to fix something that hasn't broken yet, shall we say? And of course, we're trying to help them, realize the benefits of migration, because you really can't have a digital transformation strategy leveraging equipment that's sometimes 30 or 40 years old. So the idea is, how do we have a company that has built that level of reliability and trust with their customers, and knowing the fact that these products will never fail, and then at the same time helping them migrate over, usually as part of a whole digital transformation strategy, to move to the point where they can now take advantage of some of the technologies today. Because if you're going to leverage things like digital twin, augmented reality, virtual reality, mixed reality, artificial intelligence, machine learning, that needs to be done leveraging the products of today and the solutions of today. So how do you migrate over? But the reason it's hard for companies, let's say, from, say, the enterprise, sometimes people will say, well, why can't we just control the plant floor or the factory floor with some of these enterprise solutions? It's because they may not necessarily be designed for the level of reliability and durability. There's unique things in a manufacturing application that are different, let's say, in a consumer application, because the idea is because failure is not an option. Failure costs certainly a lot of money. Sometimes, unfortunately, it even can cost or impact lives. So the idea is we need to make sure that these solutions are, completely tested and durable. And the customer has begun to trust companies like Rockwell Automation, and knowing that, so that gives them the advantage of at least being able to have build the foundation of the control solution on the factory floor, and then be able to introduce everything else that comes along with digital transformation and begin to bring those technologies along so they can really have the best of all worlds.
So, Craig, as companies become more and more distributed, they become more global. They're in positions to acquire companies. How does a company like Rockwell and their technologies help in those situations?
Well, the thing is a company like Rockwell is used to working with companies that sometimes can be a small mom and pop shop, shall we say, in a single small manufacturing facility. And then, of course, global accounts that may have dozens and dozens of plants located around the world. So what they understand is they understand the solution scalability. They understand that sometimes is it a matter of just controlling one process on one line, or is it hundreds of, and sometimes even thousands of processes on a multitude of lines, even in different types of processes that can range from, discrete to hybrid to process. So the thing that's important is to really have that level of experience to be able to deal with the scale, because that's something that is not, it's a very difficult process to be able to manage and implement, to be able to do the monitoring and control and do it in an effective manner. And the ability for certainly to have, let's say, in a situation of, let's say, a corporate, in a corporate headquarters, to be able to monitor sometimes these dozens of plants and be able to do comparative to say the overall equipment effectiveness in this plant is 82%, and in this plant it's 84%, and then take and find out what can be done in the plant that has, say, a lower OEE score, and be able to make the necessary changes and fixes and adjustments. So this is where a company like that has that, that very scalable, that can go, again, single facility to multi plants around the world, be able to do that scale and be able to provide that level for their customer, but also to help them grow. Because the idea is if somebody starts small with one plant, that becomes 2 plants, that becomes 3 plants, and now these plants are being distributed all over the world, especially, in companies that have, say, a global supply chain. How do you able to do that monitoring and management and help the customer grow so they can start so the existing solutions they have scale up, rather than having to do a full-blown rip and replace of the solutions that they have. So the idea is you're making intelligent investments in these solutions, knowing that they're scalable and knowing that they can be applied, from one facility in one location to, dozens of locations around the world, regardless of geography.
Craig, with all the technologies that have changed, with all the business conditions that have changed, supply chain, globalization, Rockwell has been there for decades, as you spoke about, with reliability as being the constant. There's another dimension to change, which are the people that are using the technology. The new generation that's coming in to OT, they have a different skill set than the previous generation. Do you think Rockwell is well positioned for this new generation to sort of take over and lead?
Yes, Rockwell's extremely well positioned to kind of help with this transition to the next generation of workers. And one of the reasons for that is their partnerships and their ecosystem. To give an example, obviously they work very closely with the company PTC. PTC, through their innovation suite, which is a joint collaboration between Rockwell Automation and PTC. But that brings also technologies like through PTC's Vuforia with augmented reality and virtual reality. And you bring in a worker, and the worker has great technical savvy, but doesn't really understand what's in the plant. Augmented reality acts as their guide. It's like having your own personal assistant as you're going through the plant, to give them the extra information that's laid out on a template, to give them the instructions that they need as far as how what they can do. And it guides them through. And with technology like virtual reality, think of it. Most of these workers are more familiar with Fortnite than they are with manufacturing. They're used to wearing, certainly headsets. They're used to wearables, and they're used to that. And think of it, one of the challenges you've had in manufacturing is how to take people who never thought of manufacturing as a career for them, would rather go into finance, for example. And they can say, you mean I can actually go and, as part of my job, leverage doing things like simulation for training or simulate any type of thing that could possibly happen in the plant. I can now do things like using digital twin technology to create all models of any of these assets and processes in software first and be able to model them before these models the processes are deployed. So now I get to use all this great technology. And even if I don't necessarily understand, if someone says to me, what's a cat cracker, they might think it's a pet rather than something in an oil refinery. So the idea is that this really helps them to kind of bridge that gap and have the tools that they enjoy working with and they're comfortable working with. But these are the tools that help them with their work processes. So it was critical for companies like Rockwell to have an ecosystem where they can bring along some of this technology, work with companies as they do with PTC through Innovation Suite and some of what that brings along to the table. And I think that's what really is very, very helpful to kind of bring that new workforce. And the idea is that really helps develop a sense of loyalty to this workforce because they may not have heard of a company like Rockwell Automation before. They certainly may be extremely familiar with, with Amazon and Microsoft and certainly, Apple. But at the same time, they're not going to be, when this now realizes that, boy, the companies that are in the manufacturing space actually do have some really cool technology. And it's something that I actually look forward to going to work and look forward to being able to deploy. And this will, then they begin to tell their friends, and then it begins to begins to get into certainly as part of their, education system. And then they begin to be able to apply that in the real world once they graduate college.